Marcus Henderson wiped the sweat from his brow as he surveyed the overgrown lawn of his grandmother's old Victorian house. 3 weeks had passed since her funeral, and the property, now legally his, needed serious attention before he could even think about selling it or moving in. The inheritance had been unexpected. His grandmother had kept the existence of this second property a secret from most of the family. Located in a once vibrant neighborhood that had seen better days, the house stood as a testament to his grandmother's stubborn independence. Might as well start somewhere, Marcus muttered to himself, unloading the lawnmower from his truck. The grass was knee-high in some places, the flower beds choked with weeds. As he pushed the mower across the front lawn, a curtain twitched in the neighboring house. Marcus paid it no mind. He'd been warned by the estate lawyer that some of the neighbors might be particular, especially since the property had stood empty for several months while his grandmother was in hospice care. 2 hours later, with the front lawn looking considerably better, Marcus was startled by a shrill voice behind him. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" Marcus turned to find a middle-aged woman with her arms crossed firmly over her chest, designer sunglasses perched on her nose despite the cloudy day. Her perfectly highlighted hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and her expression suggested she'd just caught someone stealing her prized roses. "I'm just doing some yard work," Marcus replied, gesturing to the mower. "Place needs it, as you can see." The woman's lips thinned into a disapproving line. "This is private property, Mrs. Henderson's property, and I know for a fact that you don't belong here." Marcus took a deep breath. "Actually, Mrs. Henderson was my grandmother. She passed away last month, and I've inherited the house." Something flickered across the woman's face, doubt perhaps, or annoyance that her assumed authority was being challenged. "I've never seen you here before. Not once in the 15 years I've lived next door." "Gran and I weren't close for many years," Marcus admitted, not feeling the need to explain his family's complicated history to this stranger. "But she left the house to me in her will." The woman, who still hadn't introduced herself, scoffed. "A likely story. I'm on the neighborhood watch committee, and we've had problems with squatters and vandals targeting empty houses. I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately." Marcus felt his patience wearing thin. He'd driven 3 hours to get here, planned to spend the entire weekend cleaning up the property, and wasn't about to be chased off by an overzealous neighbor. "Look, Mrs. Patricia Wilcox," she supplied coldly. "Mrs. Wilcox, I appreciate your concern for the neighborhood, but this is my property now. I have all the paperwork to prove it." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Anyone can forge papers these days. For all I know, you broke in and are casing the place." Mrs. Henderson had valuable antiques. Marcus laughed, which only seemed to infuriate Patricia further. "Look, I'm just trying to clean up the yard. I'm not bothering anyone." "I'm calling the police," Patricia announced, pulling her phone from her pocket with a flourish. "They can sort this out." Before Marcus could protest further, she had already dialed 911, turning away slightly as she reported an intruder on the Henderson property. Marcus heard her describing him as suspicious and belligerent. Marcus sighed heavily, leaning against his truck. He reached inside for his wallet, pulling out his driver's license and the property deed the lawyer had given him. This was not how he planned to spend his Saturday, but something told him Mrs. Patricia Wilcox wasn't going to back down easily. As a police cruiser pulled up 20 minutes later, Marcus couldn't help but wonder what other surprises his grandmother's legacy had in store for him. The police cruiser came to a stop at the curb, and 2 officers stepped out. One was older with salt and pepper hair and a weathered face that suggested he'd seen it all. The other was younger, probably in his early 30s. Patricia straightened her posture and marched toward them, pointing accusingly at Marcus. "That's him, officers. I caught him trespassing on Mrs. Henderson's property. The poor woman passed away recently, and now this man is trying to take advantage." The older officer, his nameplate read Reynolds, approached with a measured stride. "Ma'am, we got your call about a trespasser. Is this the individual?" "Yes. He claims he inherited the property, but I've never seen him before in my life. Mrs. Henderson never mentioned any grandson to me, and we were quite close." Marcus stepped forward, documents in hand. "Officers, I'm Marcus Henderson. My grandmother, Eleanor Henderson, passed away 3 weeks ago. I have the deed and my identification right here." Officer Reynolds took the papers while his younger partner, Officer Chen, kept a watchful eye on the situation. Reynolds examined the deed carefully, then looked at Marcus's driver's license. "These appear to be in order," he said after a moment. "The deed is properly notarized and registered with the county." Patricia's face flushed. "Well, anyone could have forged those documents. You should run a more thorough check." Officer Chen spoke up. "Ma'am, we can verify property records through our system. What was the full name of the previous owner?" "Eleanor Margaret Henderson," Marcus supplied. Patricia crossed her arms tighter. "That proves nothing. He could have gotten that information anywhere." Reynolds returned to the cruiser and radioed in to verify the property records. Meanwhile, Patricia continued her interrogation, seemingly oblivious to how uncomfortable she was making everyone. "Where were you when your grandmother was in hospice care? I visited her every week with my church group, and she never once mentioned you." Marcus's jaw tightened. "My relationship with my grandmother was complicated. We reconciled shortly before she went into hospice, but that's really none of your business." Himph. Convenient timing, I'd say. Officer Reynolds returned before the conversation could escalate further. "Mr. Henderson checks out. The property was indeed transferred to him through the probate court 3 weeks ago." The color drained from Patricia's face, but she wasn't ready to concede defeat. "Well, I still think you should run a background check on him. What if he pressured poor Eleanor into changing her will?" Officer Chen exchanged a look with his partner. "Mrs. Wilcox, filing a false police report is a serious offense. Mr. Henderson has provided legal documentation of ownership. Unless you have specific evidence of wrongdoing, I suggest you return to your home." But I'm just trying to protect the neighborhood. We have standards here." An older man emerged from the house on the other side of Marcus' property. "For heaven's sake, Patricia, give it a rest. You're making a spectacle of yourself." The newcomer approached, extending his hand to Marcus. "Frank Donovan, I lived next to your grandmother for 20 years. She mentioned you a few times, said you were in Seattle. Sorry about your loss." Marcus shook his hand, grateful for the support. "Thank you. Yes, I moved to Seattle after college. I appreciate you stepping in." Frank turned to the officers. "Eleanor told me months ago that her grandson would be inheriting the place. Patricia just doesn't like change or admitting she's wrong." Patricia's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Other neighbors had begun to gather on their porches, watching the drama unfold. Someone across the street was filming with their phone. "This is outrageous," she sputtered. "I was only trying to protect Eleanor's property. How was I supposed to know?" "Perhaps by introducing yourself before calling the police," Marcus suggested mildly. Officer Reynolds closed his notebook. "Well, it seems this matter is resolved. Mr. Henderson, you're free to continue your yard work. Mrs. Wilcox, please think twice before calling emergency services for non-emergencies in the future." As the officers returned to their cruiser, Patricia stood frozen in place, mortification slowly replacing indignation on her face. The neighbors' whispers were clearly audible in the sudden quiet. Did Patricia just call the cops on Eleanor's grandson? Classic Patricia, always overstepping. Remember when she reported that Girl Scout for selling cookies without a permit? Frank patted Marcus on the shoulder. "Welcome to the neighborhood of son. If you need anything, I'm right next door, aside without the drama." He winked and headed back toward his house. Marcus returned to his lawnmower, aware that Patricia still hadn't moved, seemingly paralyzed by the public humiliation. By Sunday afternoon, Marcus had made impressive progress on the property. The front and back yards were now properly mowed, the hedges trimmed, and several bags of yard waste sat neatly by the curb. Inside, he began sorting through his grandmother's belongings, a bittersweet task that unearthed memories he'd long forgotten. He was taking a well-deserved break on the front porch, nursing a cold soda, when a silver SUV pulled into Patricia Wilcox's driveway. A tall man in golf attire stepped out, followed by a teenage girl who immediately buried her face in her phone. Patricia emerged from her house to greet them, her voice carrying across the lawn. "How was your golf weekend, dear? Did Maddie enjoy the resort spa?" The man, presumably Mr. Wilcox, responded too quietly for Marcus to hear, but his body language suggested weariness that went beyond a tiring weekend. The teenager slouched for the house without looking up from her device. Frank Donovan appeared around the side of his house, carrying a plate covered in aluminum foil. "Thought you might be hungry after all that work," he said, climbing the steps to Marcus' porch. "My wife insists on feeding anyone within a 50-foot radius." Marcus accepted the plate gratefully. "Thanks, Mr. Donovan." "Frank, please." The older man took a seat in the wicker chair beside Marcus. "So are you planning to sell the place or move in?" "Haven't decided yet," Marcus admitted. "I work remotely, so I could technically live anywhere, but I'm not sure if I want to leave Seattle." He paused. "Did you know my grandmother well?" Frank's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Eleanor? Oh, yes. Stubborn as the day is long, but the best neighbor you could ask for. She used to make the most incredible pies with plums from that tree in the backyard." He pointed to an old plum tree that desperately needed pruning. "I remember those pies," Marcus said softly. "She'd send them for my birthday, even after." "After the falling out with your mother?" Frank supplied gently when Marcus trailed off. "She mentioned it a few times. Never gave details, but I could tell it pained her." Across the street, Patricia was still standing in her driveway, now seemingly arguing with her husband. Her voice had risen enough that occasional phrases drifted over. "Complete humiliation, and you weren't here to deal with it," being the clearest. Frank shook his head. "Don't mind the Wilcox drama. It's a Sunday tradition around here." Does she always call the police on new neighbors, or am I special? Marcus asked dryly. Frank chuckled. Patricia fancies herself the neighborhood guardian. She's reported kids for lemonade stands without permits, called animal control on a family's therapy dog for barking, and once organized a petition to prevent a family from painting their house navy blue because it wasn't historically accurate. Sounds exhausting. For everyone involved, yes. Frank glanced toward the Wilcox property. Though I will say, yesterday was a new low, even for her. The neighborhood group chat has been buzzing nonstop. Marcus winced. There's a neighborhood group chat? Oh, yes. And now everyone knows you're Eleanor's grandson and that Patricia made a fool of herself. Her social standing has taken quite a hit. As if on cue, Patricia's husband threw up his hands in exasperation and stormed into the house. Patricia remained in the driveway, staring after him before turning to glare across at Marcus' property. When she noticed Frank and Marcus watching, she quickly averted her gaze and hurried inside. I'm not trying to cause problems, Marcus said. I just want to get the place in order. Frank patted his arm. You're not causing anything. Patricia creates her own problems. He stood up. Now under that foil is my wife's famous lasagna, best eaten warm. After Frank left, Marcus took the lasagna inside and sat at his grandmother's kitchen table. The house felt less empty somehow, as if the connections he was forming with the neighbors, well, with Frank at least, were breathing new life into the old walls. Later that evening, as he was bringing in tools from the yard, he noticed a sleek convertible pull up in front of Patricia's house. A woman about Patricia's age, but dressed far more casually in jeans and a stylish blouse, stepped out carrying a bottle of wine. As she walked to Patricia's door, she spotted Marcus and gave him a friendly wave. Marcus waved back, puzzled by the gesture, until he overheard her greeting to Patricia. So where is this dangerous criminal you call the cops on? I want all the juicy details. Patricia's response was inaudible, but her attempt to quickly usher her friend inside spoke volumes. As night fell, Marcus sat on the porch with his laptop, catching up on work emails and contemplating his next steps. The neighborhood was quiet now, streetlights casting warm pools of light along the sidewalk. Monday morning dawned bright and clear. Marcus woke early, surprised by how quickly he'd adjusted to sleeping in his grandmother's house. He planned to head back to Seattle today, but something about the property and the unfinished business with the neighborhood made him reconsider. After a quick breakfast, he walked through each room, making notes on his phone about repairs and updates. The house had good bones, as his contractor friend would say, but needed significant modernization. By mid-morning, he compiled a lengthy list and placed calls to several local contractors for estimates. He was measuring the kitchen windows for potential replacement when a tentative knock sounded at the front door. Opening it, he found a teenage girl, Patricia's daughter, he realized, standing awkwardly on the porch. Hi, she said, eyes mostly fixed on her shoes. I'm Madison Wilcox. My mom sent me to. She sighed heavily. Well, she didn't exactly send me. She doesn't know I'm here. Marcus leaned against the doorframe. Okay, what can I do for you, Madison? Maddie, she corrected, finally meeting his gaze. Everyone calls me Maddie. And I actually came to apologize for my mom. She's too proud to do it herself, but what she did was really messed up. The sincerity in the girl's voice caught Marcus off guard. Thanks, Maddie. That's unexpected. She rolled her eyes. Yeah, well, my mom tends to create situations where apologies become necessary. It's like her superpower. She hesitated, then added, my dad said she needs to make amends, but she locked herself in their bedroom and refused to come out. Marcus couldn't help but chuckle. That bad, huh? You have no idea. Someone posted a video of the whole thing on Nextdoor, and now half the neighborhood is talking about it. She shifted uncomfortably. Anyway, I also want to ask if you needed any help. I'm good at organizing stuff, and I could use the distraction. My father's threatening to cancel my summer trip to Italy if my mom doesn't make things right. Marcus considered the offer. The girl seemed genuine, and he could use an extra set of hands. Plus, he couldn't deny feeling a twinge of sympathy for a teenager caught in her mother's drama. Sure, I could use some help sorting through my grandmother's belongings, if you're serious about the offer. Maddie's face brightened. Totally serious. I actually knew your grandmother a little. She used to let me pick plums from her tree for my baking projects. She showed me how to make jam once. A warm feeling spread through Marcus's chest. I didn't know that. She was nice, Maddie said simply. Not like my mom's other friends who just talk about me like I'm not there. An hour later, Marcus and Maddie were in the attic, sorting through boxes of old photographs and memorabilia. The girl proved to be an efficient helper, creating a logical system for categorizing decades of memories. Whoa, is this you? Maddie held up a faded photograph of a young boy standing proudly next to his science fair project. Marcus took the photo, smiling at the memory. Yeah, 6th grade. My volcano actually worked too well, actually. Set off the fire alarms. Cool, Maddie grinned. I did a project on bioluminescent algae last year. Got second place. They worked companionably, with Maddie occasionally sharing stories of interactions with Eleanor. It struck Marcus how much of his grandmother's life he had missed, how many connections she had formed while he was absent. Around noon, Frank appeared with sandwiches from his wife. "Saw you had company," he said, nodding toward Maddie. "Figured you both might be hungry." Maddie helped carry the food downstairs. As they ate on the porch, a silver sedan pulled up in front of the house. A middle-aged man in a crisp button-down shirt approached the property. "Mr. Henderson," he called. "I'm Richard Wilcox, Patricia's husband." Marcus stood, extending his hand cautiously. "Marcus Henderson." Richard shook his hand firmly. "I understand my wife caused quite a scene on Saturday. I wanted to apologize personally for her behavior." Maddie stared incredulously at her father. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "Does Mom know?" 6 months had transformed both the Henderson property and the neighborhood dynamic. Marcus's grandmother's Victoria now stood proudly with fresh paint, repaired gingerbread trim, and a meticulously maintained garden. The plum tree in the backyard, properly pruned and cared for, had yielded a bountiful harvest that Marcus had shared with neighbors, all except one. Patricia Wilcox had maintained a frigid distance since that confrontational day when Marcus announced his permanent residency. Her attempts to reassert her influence in the neighborhood had largely failed, especially after Marcus established the Promise Community newsletter, a project that Maddie Wilcox enthusiastically helped manage during her senior year. On this crisp autumn Saturday, Marcus was hosting the neighborhood's first official block party. Tables lined his driveway loaded with potluck dishes, Frank manned a grill on the front lawn, and neighbors mingled freely, many stepping inside to admire the renovations. "You've done wonders with the place," commented Helen Chen, whose family lived 3 doors down. Eleanor would have been thrilled. Marcus smiled, accepting the compliment with a nod. "I like to think she orchestrated this whole thing somehow." "What do you mean?" Helen asked. "Well, she never told me about this house while she was alive. Then suddenly it's mine, and I find myself drawn to stay. Almost like she knew I needed a change." He shrugged. "Maybe I'm being fanciful." "I don't think so," Frank said, enjoying the conversation. "Eleanor was shrewd. She watched you from afar all those years, probably knew exactly what you needed before you did." He handed Marcus a plate of barbecue. "She approved of all this, especially the community building." Marcus glanced across the street where Richard and Maddie Wilcox were approaching, carrying dessert trays. Patricia was notably absent. Dad convinced Mom to bake her famous cheesecake, Maddie explained as they reached Marcus's driveway, but she refused to deliver it personally. Richard looked apologetic. "Baby steps, Marcus. She actually used your name instead of that man yesterday, which I consider progress." The neighborhood celebration continued into the evening. Solar-powered string lights illuminated the yard as children played tag on the lawn and adults gathered in conversational clusters. Marcus found himself watching it all with a sense of contentment he hadn't expected 6 months ago. "Quite the transformation," observed Eleanor's lawyer, Derek Hoffman, who had dropped by to see the renovations. "Both the house and you." Marcus chuckled. "I suppose so. Seattle seems like a lifetime ago." "And the notorious neighbor? Any more police calls?" "Not directed at me, though she did report the Rodriguez family for their unauthorized chicken coop last month. But even Patricia's influence is waning. The neighborhood's changing." As footlight deepened, Marcus noticed an unexpected figure hovering at the edge of his property. Patricia Wilcox stood uncertainly at the sidewalk, clutching what appeared to be a dish covered in foil. A hush fell over the nearest group of neighbors as they spotted her. Maddie broke away from her friends, hurrying to her mother's side with a mixture of surprise and encouragement on her face. Marcus excused himself and approached the pair. "Mrs. Wilcox," he said evenly. "Glad you could make it." Patricia's lips thinned, but she managed what might charitably be called a smile. "I brought Eleanor's plum cobbler recipe. Maddie says you've been experimenting with preserving the plums." It was the closest thing to an olive branch you could have imagined from her. Marcus accepted the dish with a genuine smile. "Thank you. That's incredibly thoughtful." An awkward silence stretched between them until Richard appeared, placing a supportive hand on his wife's shoulder. "Patricia found Eleanor's recipe card in her own collection," he explained. "Apparently, they exchanged recipes years ago. Before we had our disagreement about the historic paint colors," Patricia added stiffly. "Eleanor and I were actually quite friendly once. She was particular about things being done properly. Something I respected." Marcus recognized this statement for what it was, not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement of common ground. "She was indeed particular," he agreed. "Would you like to join us? Frank's stories about my grandmother get more outlandish with each telling. I could use another perspective." Patricia hesitated, glancing around at the neighbors who were trying not to stare. Some of these people had witnessed her humiliation 6 months ago. Some had laughed at her expense, and yet here was Marcus, extending an invitation she didn't deserve. Perhaps just for a little while, she conceded, stepping across the invisible boundary onto his property.